Welcome back, everyone, to Headlines and Beyond. My name is Dr. Daniel Karras, and we are here to bring you a new broadcast on a weekly basis, or more, that goes way beyond the headlines, way beyond what you see in other news media. Most news outlets, most media outlets, they'll hide things from you. They all have a particular point of view that they want to push, and they don't encourage you to do any research. And this is why, in many cases, you rarely ever see any history being brought up when you hear the discussion in the news. Here, you're going to actually see history brought up. We're going to look into history. We're going to do the analysis. And not only are we going to do the analysis, but I'm going to leave the method of doing the analysis open so that you can follow along and learn how to do the analysis yourself. So that you can go back and check up on what's being done and what's being said, and you can see for yourself what's going on and what's not going on. It's better to always understand for yourself as much as possible things that are going on, then allow people to tell you this is what's happening. Because there are so many different views out there. There are so many different opinions being brought out. How do you know which one is right? How do you know which one is, hiding things? And the thing is, even if the opinion is being honest, the person doesn't necessarily have to be lying to you in order for it to be wrong. The person just simply doesn't understand what's happening, and this is their view, and they honestly believe the view, but it's not necessarily the correct view to have. And that's not necessarily what's going on. And this is, how you fight propaganda. Someone can be, someone can be told propaganda. They can be told a lie, believe that lie. Because propaganda is, in many ways, it's marketing, it's PR. Is designed to capture people's imagination, and people's imaginations are caught. And if they're not asking questions, if they're not sort of questioning where the information is coming from or why they're being told a certain thing, they'll, in many cases, will accept it without question, and they'll start just sort of parroting it along because this is what they believe. Sounds good to them, and they want others to hear this good idea, and so they start spreading this propaganda around without knowing that it's actually propaganda. And this is what, in many cases, in the intelligence service, the difference between a blind asset and an asset. An asset knows what's going on. They're fully aware and interactive with what you're doing. And a blind asset has no idea what's going on. They're simply a tool that is easily manipulated, is easily told certain things, and you can use them in a very effective manner to change other people's opinions. And this is exactly, why you want to use a blind asset. A blind asset is actually amazing. It's an amazing tool for intelligence because the person really doesn't know that they're doing anything that's wrong. And so they don't see this as wrong. They see this as a good idea, and they're disseminating a good idea. They're sort of giving good information out. And so this is for myself. I think the way we could look at journalism rather than simply keeping it opinion and say, "Oh, this is journalism," because what are we seeing when we look at journalism? We're looking at how people behave. We're looking at how groups and societies behave, and this is observational psychology. But of course, because we are now moving more into historical phase, we're getting more into the analysis. We're getting more into the analytical side of things. What about what drives the analysis, the headlines? And so, we have a second service, we have a second source coming up now called Tweetlines. It's on Twitter. You can follow us there. It's iNews.Network on Twitter. That's our Twitter handle, and it will be in the description down below, and it will be out in our Twitter feeds, and so you can follow us along there. And the tweet lines will be the headlines that, with a 30-second commentary, will be the headline plus a 30-second commentary that is going on around the world. And it could be from Hungary, it could be from Ukraine, it could be from a variety of different sources. I have more than 40 different sources that I go to on a regular basis, and it could be from any variety of source, as long as the whole goal is to bring up various different ideas, various different thoughts, to show you what's going on that's not necessarily being brought out in the standard headlines. In other words, we want to go beyond what's being said in the standard headlines, like what you see on CNN, what you see on CTV. On your standard media, they have a sort of standard set of headlines. Well, what's going on beyond those standard headlines? Is there something more in the headlines that is simply not being told? It's not being brought out in the current headlines, in the sort of the popular, the mainstream headlines. And that's what Tweetlines will do. Tweetlines will bring this out with a 30-second commentary, a 30-second thought about what this tweet line is about, how it fits into the whole scope of things. And that's where the difficulty comes in, is trying to, bring something that is thoughtful within 30 seconds. And so, tonight's headlines and beyond, we'll be continuing on our topic on socialism. Last weekend we were looking at liberal intolerance. We said it was an oxymoron because liberal means to be open. But we see that through our own observation that the liberals are not indeed open. They're not open-minded. They are indeed intolerant. They have this view that they're tolerant of things that are of their own understanding, but as soon as something challenges their understanding, they're not understanding about that at all, and then they become very intolerant about this. This is homophobic, or they use the term phobic. They take whatever term they don't like, whatever idea they don't like, and add a term phobic to it, and say, well, these people are phobic. They're not of our same type. They're not properly intellectuals, and they're not of our understanding. These people don't understand what's going on, and they start belittling the people that don't fit the understanding that the liberals have, that the sort of liberal ideology. Let's understand that liberalism is an ideology. It's like a religion, because you can't prove any of it. And ironically itself, even liberalism itself, you go back to the roots of liberalism, there's no proof there, because liberalism is based on postmodernism, it's based on philosophy, and this whole philosophy of postmodernism is based entirely in concept alone. There is no reality to it. And for postmodern, there doesn't have to be a reality, because the reason why postmodern is that in 1945, as the world emerged from World War II, particularly with the realities of the atomic bomb, something that theoretically should never have happened. The atomic bomb was an anomaly. It was something in science that was not predicted. And normally modern science, this is at the time 1945, modern science would predict everything. You could predict anything with science. Science was absolute truth. Well, with the atomic bomb coming up and coming out, something that was not predicted was actually predicted not to happen. This is why the Nazis did not proceed with the atomic bomb. They actually had an atomic bomb project. People like Niels Bohr were working on the atomic bomb project, but it never went through to its full conclusion, because it was thought theoretically, but the Nazis primarily just did the theoretical work. They didn't actually go through to the so-called experimental phase where you test things out. Because in classical science, in the so-called modern science, experimentation was only there to prove existing theory. So that's why you experimented. You did experiment to prove existing theory. You did not experiment to simply explore. However, the Americans took the different approach to it. They viewed experimentation as exploration, and they used the exploration method rather than using the modern scientific method, and they produced the atomic bomb, where the theoretical method, the classical method of science, failed. And because of this ended up, in terms of the philosophical consequences of the atomic bombs, something that you're seeing, but it shouldn't be seeing, because it's theoretically impossible. This is beyond what the mind can see, but you actually can think of. Yet there it is in front of you. All of a sudden now, your whole concept of philosophy has changed, and so because that philosophy has changed, you don't believe in anything anymore. Your world has collapsed, and you see a lot of this in the sort of the sort of dystopian novels that come out of time. A lot of the novels that come out of the intellectual environment are very negative. They're very black. They're very a very somber mood. And it reflects what's been going on in postmodernism. In postmodernism, that means is that the whole concept of intellectualism is dead, and now you're into a nihilistic, a anarchistic view, a philosophical view, and everything from there on out is based on nihilism, it's based on anarchism, it's based on this postmodernist philosophy that everything is simply a concept and there is no reality. And this is where our liberalism comes from today. This is where it's based in. And so what we see, it produces the intolerance, and of course, because they don't want to see the reality, they don't want to, they saw the reality, they saw the atomic bomb. In many cases, reality does stare them in the face, And they don't want to see this reality. They want to keep their academic environment. They want to keep their intellectualism. And the only way to do that, to keep your intellectualism in an environment that is fundamentally collapsed, that's no longer there, is to simply ignore the reality and choose to create your own. Of course, if everything's a concept, then you can actually do that. If everything in the world to you is a concept, and everything is based on nihilism, everything is based on anarchy, this is postmodernism, then everything is a concept, and because everything is a concept, then your whole reality is a concept too. And this includes transgender, your gender is a concept, sexuality is a concept, nothing is real, there are no real consequences. Ironically enough, religion is a concept, so you can believe in anything you want to, as long as you believe in God, everything's A-okay. It's all good, as the phrase says. And so what it becomes sort of like, this is, if you look at these things carefully, go to the root of these things. In terms of ecumenism, the whole cult, the ecumenical movement, where you have the Pope praying with all these different types of people who are different religious groups. Well, that's postmodernism. That's anarchy. That is nihilism. No rules. That nothing matters. Everything is simply conceptual. That's what that is, and that's what allows them to do that is because, well, it's all concept. There's no reality. My concept is no better than your concept, and we can all exist on our own concepts together. Because I can ignore everybody else's concept and focus on my concept, then everything's okay. So we live in a world of, ironically enough, liberal ignorance. So liberalism opens up everything, opens the door to everything, but the intolerance, the ignorance, shuts your mind and says, well, okay, I can live with my own existence, none of this other stuff affects me. Even though it actually does, you simply ignore the effect and go on your merry way and say, this is what my existence is. And of course, to understand this, as I said before, this is not something that's simple, it's not something that's easy, there is a history to this, and you should be taking notes while you're watching this. And it's not that you have to take specific, well, what notes should I take? Just take what comes to your mind. Something pops into your mind and say, this is a good idea, or you think something's going to affect you, write it down. It doesn't have to be written down neatly or whatever. Just jot it down. These are called ad hoc notes. Ad hoc notes are random notes, the things that you think about as you're watching something. Have a journal there or a diary or whatever you want to call it, and just write down random notes as you're thinking along. You're watching this, you're thinking. Write down your random notes. That's an ad hoc journal. And then from your ad hoc notes, you start to organize these notes. You start to organize your understandings. And this is what the organized notes become your rough outlines for an essay. That's actually what we're doing here. We're doing the rough outlines of an essay. This is how the news broadcast is put together, how the headlines and beyond is put together. It comes from a whole series of ad hoc notes that I gathered during the week, or however long I've been working on this project. It comes together into a single organized note, or sort of a note sheet here that's in front of me. And from here, this produces the rough draft, the first draft of an essay. This essay, the visual essay that you're seeing here, will at some point in time become a documentary. And this is how this process moves along. So it is actually publishing, it is disseminating ideas, and this is an essay, and documentaries themselves are also essays as well. They're just simply more polished up. This is sort of the first draft of an essay, if you will. So this is, the notes are there in front of me. The essay is coming out direct from within my mind, and it's coming out as I'm speaking. So I'm writing instantaneously with my mouth. And that's where the difficulty comes in sometimes. You see me flub things sometimes. It's because it's difficult to automatically think of the different ideas and the ways you want to phrase things. That does present a degree of difficulty. And you do get tripped up sometimes, and it does take a bit of practice to get used to it. So it's not that I'm an expert, and it's just the more I practice, the better I get at this, and things do get better. So one thing is, you could take this as an example of how to do things, how to start your essays, how to start your academic studies if you're interested in the university here, and some of the educational options that I'm going to be providing as of the next issue of the next edition of Headlines and Beyond. Right now we're on the weekend edition. And as we get into the midweek edition, I'll bring up some of the educational options as well, and then you can start adding the educational options into your news broadcast, into your watching here, and then you can actually get a degree in this. You can actually sort of work to get a bachelor's degree, and it's not necessarily for the piece of paper, it's for the understanding. Getting a degree is about improving your mind. It's not about the piece of paper that you're going to get at the end of the program. Anyways, that being said, I said this is based on research. This is based on studying. And to do this, the base understanding here, the first two books that you want to look at are George Orwell's 1984 and Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince. These are your two base books that will sort of introduce you to the world of geopolitics, and you can start seeing some of the observational psychology in there. From there, you want to go and get into studies. Studies are broader-based topics. The first studies you want to do are author studies. You want to study the works of George Orwell. You want to study the works of Niccolo Machiavelli, including doing a bit of a biography on the person, and starting to understand what influenced the writings of George Orwell, what influenced the writings of Niccolo Machiavelli. And this is how you can do this, by looking at the biography, by looking at the works. You can start pulling out some of the personal influences that sort of affected this. From there, you want to move into Fyodor Dostoevsky. Again, this is listed down below. And he's the next author that you want to understand. If you want to understand the whole emergence of postmodernism and the emergence of Western thought and Western philosophy, is Fyodor Dostoevsky. He gives you an outside view because he was not a Western philosopher. He was influenced by Western philosophy. Western philosophy was coming into Russia at the time, but he was not a Western philosopher. He was an Eastern philosopher. Beyond that, if you want to get into the psychology of things, you want to look at Stanley Milgram, and you also want to look at Dr. Philip Zimbardo, and of course the MK Ultra project. These are the different areas that are in the recommended studies here. And this is your base study. This is your base work to understand what's going on. Anyway, in our next segment, when we come back, we will get into the difference between observational psychology and textbook psychology and see how it plays out with the New World Order and Illuminatis. All right, coming back.
iNN, uncut, unedited, and real. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Hi, my name is Dr. Daniel Karras. I'm your host for Headlines and Beyond on iNN. If you like the show we're seeing, I do not monetize my channel because there's a lot of copyright issues with this. It creates a lot of problems. So how do I make my money? Well, if you like this show, it's very simple. We do it the PBS format. I ask you for a donation, but I'm not going to ask you for a lot. Or, well, all you have to do is, if you have $1 or $2 in your pocket, take it out, put it in an envelope. I'll give you the address. It will be in the description of my channel. Go to the channel description, go to About, and you'll see the address to send the $1 or $2 that you send. All I'm asking for $1 or $2. If you got $1 or $2 in your pocket, stick it in an envelope. Send it to iNN. That's iNN. The address is 87 Telson Road. It's 87 Telson, Telson Road. That's in Markham, Ontario. Postal code is L3R184. And I thank you for your support. Alrighty.
iNN, provoke, inform, and change. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Welcome back to the other side of Headlines and Beyond. We've taken our break. And we're going to get into observational psychology versus textbook psychology. There's two different types of psychology. One is scientific and the other one isn't. And let me take a bit of a break here. Excuse me. Said unedited, we're not going to cut anything out. We just stop our times. We have our breaks because we need to put the commercials in. And at the same time, we also need to put... we have a time limit of how much we can actually film per segment. And this has to do with the camera. Cameras are only can record certain amounts for certain periods. So this provides us with the best options. So we're talking about observational psychology and textbook psychology and the differences between the two. And this is how we can then go demonstrate the differences and understand how liberals can be intolerant. Liberalism is intolerant and ignorant at the same time. In other words, what happens is intolerance produces ignorance, ignorance produces intolerance. They go back and forth. There's a sort of a two-way street there. They are related to each other. They are part of a closed-minded society, part of a closed-minded view of the world. And they can be produced in a variety of different ways. In this case here, these are people who are calling themselves open. Open liberalism, to be liberal means to be open, to be free. And yet these people who call themselves liberals are not open and free. They restrict themselves to their ideas and their ideas alone, and they refuse to see outside of that view. So what happens is the intolerance is produced by the refusal to see outside the view. The ignorance is the refusal to see outside that particular view. And this can be observed. This is observational psychology. This is something that you see. In the works by Dr. Philip Zimbardo, you can take a look and see, because they recorded a video, you see what's going on, and you can actually see for yourself the different behaviors that are going on there. There is no real interpretation for you. You're left to interpret the visual result on your own. Textbook psychology, this is modern psychology, that comes up now, and someone said that I'm ignorant of the modern psychology. Modern psychology does not present you with a video. What modern psychology does in the so-called psychological studies presents you with a paper. And the paper is somebody's view on what's happened. They're not giving you the actual data. They're not seeing the video. They're simply giving you their opinion, their scientific opinion. And you have to accept their valid, what they call valid scientific opinion as authority. In other words, in order for you to view what they produce as true, you have to accept their authority. And in many cases, what they'll do is they'll go back and say, well, scientific is the absolute truth. This is modernism. They're ignoring the atomic bomb. They're ignoring the reality. They're ignoring postmodernism. They're going back to modernism. Right? They're ignoring everything else. This is the ignorance. By definition, this is what ignorance is. Right? To ignore things. They're going back to modernism, saying science and mathematics are absolute truth. As long as you produce a statistic showing your view, then your view is absolutely correct. And this is not the case. There are a variety of ways you can actually produce mathematical results, and that the mathematics not be real. And this is understood by physicists. Physicists will know that you can actually take a mathematical result and demonstrate the mathematical result is not necessarily true. In other words, mathematics does produce, from a point of view of physics, from an understanding of experimental physics and observational physics, that mathematics produces hallucinations. These are mathematically induced hallucinations. And this is because you're using computers to work out your equations, and you often visualize these equations in graphs and so on and so forth. These are the mathematically induced hallucinations. But psychology, again, completely ignores this, doesn't care about that, and says, well, this is what this is. And this is what textbook psychology is. Textbook psychology is about the absolute truth of psychology. It does not challenge theory whatsoever. It doesn't challenge the textbook theory at all, but rather tries to fit everything within the theoretical view. So all observation is now pared down and categorized into the textbook view of the world. In other words, it closes off its mind and says, this is the way things are, and everything has to fit within our various different groupings, or various different labels. And we see from observation that this doesn't work. As a matter of fact, all you have to do is go look and see what's going on with people who are homeless, and see the level of mental illness out there, to see that modern psychology is just simply non-functional anymore. It doesn't work anymore. Not even the medication works anymore. Because what happens is, all the medication does, talk to a person who is mentally ill, talk to a person on the street, you begin to realize that they are in many cases schizophrenic, they have hallucinations. You ask them, well, why aren't you on medication? Because medication is supposed to cure all this stuff. And they say, well, medication does not cure this stuff. What it does, it physically immobilizes them, it makes them unable to act on the mental thoughts that are happening. So in other words, take yourself as a mental patient, and you're having a horrific hallucination, somebody's attacking you, and now add a drug to it where it immobilizes you, you can't move. The thoughts are still there, the hallucination is still there, the feelings of being attacked are still there, but now the drug that you're taking, the medicine that you're taking, that was supposed to help you, has immobilized you. I mean, in other words, it's left you helpless. You cannot fight back. You are now attacked. You are now raped by this hallucination. This is what's going on inside inside the world of the schizophrenic when they're on medication. And this is why in many cases schizophrenic do not like taking the medication. And at some point in time will stop taking the medication because they do not want to be locked up. They don't want to be immobilized while they're having these hallucinations. And so they will come off the medication, and in many cases to a tragic result, because in many cases when they do start having these hallucinations, when they do have an episode, the police are often called in. They don't see the police as police. They see the police as demons. They see them as aliens. They see them as the enemy, and they see the police attacking them. And as they move to defend themselves against this hallucination that's attacking them, the police are trained only to kill the person. So in other words, when you see a mental person being killed on the streets, you watch this on the news broadcast, and you're seeing a mental person being killed, well, the thing is, the police aren't trained to do anything else. They're not trained to immobilize. They're not trained to talk the person out of the hallucination, to bring the person down. Matter of fact, a lot of the police training will actually trigger psychotic episodes. It will trigger the events and cause these events to get worse and to become fatal. The thing is, this has been known about for a long time. This is what I'm saying about, looking at, in the recommended study, looking at Dr. Philip Zimbardo, Dr. Stanley Milgram. This stuff was brought out back then. Stanley Milgram did this work in the 1950s, and Dr. Philip Zimbardo did his work in the 1970s. So from the 1950s and 1970s, the psychological events of talking down a person who was having a psychotic episode was known about. It could have been in the training manuals for the police. It just simply was purposely chosen to be left out of the police training. So police training, when it was designed, the police training was never designed, never intended to have anything other than a fatal result when encountering a psychotic episode with a person who's mentally ill. This is the training. This is what you see in Ferguson. This is what you see in Baltimore. Anytime you see a police shooting an unarmed black person or an unarmed person in general, or you see this general police abuse, where you see going on in sort of these protests and so on, you see this brutal response by the police. This is the training. It's mindless. It's mindless violence, and the control is by the authorities. The police are not trained to think. They're trained to act and to obey orders. They're simply there as a machine, as a tool for the higher authority to control and direct. And when you understand this, you understand this is not sort of called institutionalized racism. This is not about the individual officer. Arresting and charging an individual officer is not going to change the system. It's not going to change the thought that went into the system, that sort of designed the system. You need to fundamentally change the system. And when you understand the system that produced the brutal police, the police brutality, was a liberal system, was a postmodernist system, then you begin to understand that the problem, that liberalism, electing a liberal, electing a Democrat, electing someone who openly says that they're socialist, is not going to solve the problem, because it's part of their belief, it's part of their philosophy, it's part of their understanding. And when you go in to look at why they understand what they understand, why they think the way they think in terms of the socialism, what they're trying to do is that they're trying to socially engineer the perfect society. They're trying to create a utopia. And what are these utopias? These are the New World Orders. The socialist utopias are the New World Order. And this is why, when you go back into history, all of a sudden, once socialism is gone, once you go back before the birth of socialism, and that was basically around 1800, 1700, 1800, so when socialism really sort of popped out. Prior to that, you do not see anything about the New World Order. The New World Order completely disappears. What you do have are the monarchs, you have the sort of the kingdoms and the fiefdoms, but you do not have the concept of the New World Order. The New World Order comes up later on when you have the emergence of democracy, when you have the emergence of a socialist understanding of the world. And so it understands that the New World Order is the social utopia, it's a social study, and it's not a monolithic idea. I'll give an example. The Nazis, who were socialists, they were socialists on the right, had one view of a New World Order. were going to engineer a new perfect world. That's what they were there for. And they weren't there because they were mean and putting everybody in a concentration camp. They were there to create a perfect society that didn't have these problems of criminality, of rape and whatever. They wanted to create the perfect world. That was their goal. They were going to fix society. They were going to fix the world. But that didn't work out. What ended up happening, as we saw, was World War II. We saw what happened to the Nazis in 1945, and that was it. That was the end of the Nazi New World Order. Same thing as with the with socialism on the left, right? That's the communists, and communism. Communism, which was actually a liberal idea, liberal is on the left. Liberalism is on the left, along with humanitarianism. That's all on the left, and it's about the change. It's about changing the society by changing the various different environmental factors. Nationalism is about genetics. It's about changing the genetic makeup of society, that we are genetically controlled. And so it's about genetic manipulation, genetic engineering. That's the Nazi New World Order. And that's the socialist, the right New World Order. The socialist left New World Order is about psychology. It's about the environment, about making and creating a new environment that educates people about how to behave in a proper socialist utopia, how to create a socialist utopia through the change of environment, through the change in mind, through the change in psychology. And this is why you see in many cases the left are so focused on education. It's not about genetics, it's about educating them. If you can educate the person the right way, then they'll think the right way, and we will have a perfect society. But we see in history, from the collapse of the Soviet Union, which was the social left New World Order, we saw the psychopathic society emerge. We saw what was in it. We were able to see what came out of it, and we see the same psychopathic society in Europe. That's emerging. And when we try it here in Ontario, Kathleen Wynne is bringing in social. We see the psychopathic society emerge here as well. We see it with Obama in the United States. We saw it through most of the progressives in the United States. These so-called progressives who are progressing the world. They're bringing out a new world order. They're creating a new world, a new utopia. We see the psychopathic behaviors in these societies. We see the horrible outcomes from these societies. The millions who died, the millions who are sacrificed for this better new world. And I think the socialists come back and say, these deaths, these people who were killed, is worth it. They think this is necessary. You kill people in order to make the world better. Oh, there's not enough food in the world. You need to kill X amount of people because you can't produce more food. This is what environmental is about. Creating the perfect environment, fixing the world, creating a global environment that we can all live in. How do you do it? You start killing people. And it's brought out as kindness, as doing them a favor, because how would you want to live in a world where it's all about garbage? And they bring out these really nice ideas and say, if you kill the person, this is what's going to happen. So they're not bringing out the bad side of death. They're bringing out the good side of it, how death is good, and that death is a virtue, and killing people is a virtue. This is abortion. This is euthanasia. This is culling societies, culling groups of people who are not so-called productive people, who are social parasites. And this is the whole term of social parasites. And then this all termed under social justice. And so this is what we see in the New World Orders. And ironically enough, the Illuminati, who are not immune to all this, fall into everything. They believe that the Illuminati have changed from the monarchist societies to the socialist societies. They changed their views. And so the Illuminati themselves are not a monolithic thing. Although we use the term Illuminati here and New World Order, we're not talking about a monolithic thing. We're talking about something that's more complex, something more almost like a mosaic, put together with tiny little different pieces. We see a larger picture with it, but the tiny little pieces are individual, they're by themselves, and they're not necessarily interconnected the way we think they're interconnected. Our view of interconnection between the different Illuminati groups as a single monolithic thing is something that we see. It's an appearance. It's not reality. And we come back on the other side, we'll talk more about the psychopathic society and what it's doing today and how it emerges within both modern politics and within the events that are going on in the news today. All right, on the other side.
iNN, uncut, unedited, and real. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Hi, my name is Dr. Daniel Karras. I'm your host for Headlines and Beyond on iNN. If you like the show we're seeing, I do not monetize my channel because there's a lot of copyright issues with this. It creates a lot of problems. So how do I make my money? Well, if you like this show, it's very simple. We do it the PBS format. I ask you for a donation, but I'm not going to ask you for a lot. Or, well, all you have to do is, if you have $1 or $2 in your pocket, take it out, put it in an envelope. I'll give you the address. It will be in the description of my channel. Go to the channel description, go to About, and you'll see the address to send the $1 or $2 that you send. All I'm asking for $1 or $2. If you got $1 or $2 in your pocket, stick it in an envelope. Send it to iNN. That's iNN. The address is 87 Telson Road. It's 87 Telson, Telson Road. That's in Markham, Ontario. Postal code is L3R184. And I thank you for your support. Alrighty.
iNN, provoke, inform, and change. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Welcome back to the other side of our break. And we're talking about liberal intolerance. We were looking at the difference between observational psychology and textbook psychology and how that kind of emerges and everything. How everything emerges. And it does appear today in the news. It's not something that's actually hidden. You can actually do the observation today. And this has to do with this whole issue that we see a lot in the news. If you're watching anything in the news, you talk about the LGBT, the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender community. That's LGBTA. And this is an outgrowth of socialism. This is an outgrowth of liberalism. And as I said before, because liberalism and socialism is a fundamentally postmodernist view, you are looking at the world from a conceptual point of view, because everything is a concept, including religion. This is how you can have all these churches praying together, all these religions praying together. It's all a postmodernist idea. Everything is a concept, everything goes. There are no right and wrong. Everybody has their own different degrees of truth. Everyone has their own truths. And because of this, you can now have the LGBT community, which is basically a conceptual community that says, well, if we are not human beings, if we're not moral people, that anything goes, then so does an open sexual society. These are people who fundamentally believe in a sexual society. They believe that we are sexual human beings. And of course, because they are liberal, they want to understand that in order to have a perfect sexual society, to have this sexual utopia, they need to educate children on being the proper sexual beings. Right? The whole issue of education. And this is why you see in many cases with liberals, when they go out and they campaign on politics, they're always talking about education. But you need to ask yourself ask yourself the question, when they talk about education, what education are they talking about? They're talking about sex education, educating the perfect sexual being, which in many cases is what pedophilia is, grooming the children to properly have sex, to accept the sexual abuse that is happening to them as being normal. I mean, I went out and sort of talked, I ended up hanging out with a lot of young people. And that's on the internet, on Tiny Chat. There's a variety of different chat servers you can go on to, or through text or through video, and you can hang out with people. And more often than not, they're significantly young. There aren't very many older people out there. I think the age tops out at 35. Beyond 35, there's almost no one over 35 in these chat groups, and they're primarily 35 and under. So basically, there's on the young end, you're 13 years old, so 13 to 35, that's your extremes there in terms of your age limits. And then really beyond that, there's really not much out there in terms of beyond that. So if you're an older person and you want to get into these chat groups, you have to accept that, you're dealing primarily with younger people. You're not going to be in a younger environment. And they're not going to accept you if you stand there and say, I'm an adult, I'm older than you, respect my authority. You have to sort of give up your authority. You have to give up your sense of age and just sort of hang out with them. And that's what kids do, young people. They hang out. There's no other term for it because they don't do anything specific. You just hang out. You read, you whatever, you do whatever you want to do when you're hanging out on these different groups. And as you hang out with these different groups, different people have different discussions about different things, and you can see standard behaviors. And one group isn't necessarily specifically different from another group. If you look at things overall and go around from group to group to group, if that's what you want to do, you'll find out that the discussions are primarily the same level of attitudes pop up. You have your jocks, you have your nerds, you have your geeks. All the different fragments of society are there. You have the rich, you have the sort of called the elitists are out there, people who are wealthy, who are well off. They think they're better than everybody else. You have your arrogant out there. You have your conceited out there. In other words, all the different variety types of people are there. So you do have a good group, a good sampling of society. If you want to do an observational study in observational psychology, you want to do that, this is a great place to do it. You want to see how these attitudes of the young people, sort of the divisions in society between geeks, jocks, and whatever, and the so-called cyberbullying, you want to look at that, see how that translates to what's happening with the adults. You'll find out that what's going on in the adult world in many ways mirrors what's going on in the young world. Why? Because as you don't change your views that significantly as an adult, you just simply become more comfortable with them. The adult view of the world is a more comfortable view of the world. But the young person's view of the world, they're not comfortable with their behavior. The behavior hasn't fully set yet, so they're still pretty much malleable. They can change their behaviors if they want to. But what you do see is when you talk to particularly the girls, most of the girls do not want to have sex. They're not really sexually oriented. They only become sexually oriented when you start seeing the number of guys out there and the way the guys behave, and their response to the sexual behavior of the guys, which is almost continuous, is that if I don't become acclimated to the environment, if I don't accept the sexual environment of the guys, I'm not going to have a boyfriend. I'm not going to be able to find someone to marry. I'm not going to have a family. And girls, from a very young age, are very thinking about the family. They're thinking about setting that. They're thinking about what we call the nesting, if you want to call it instinct, is there. It's functional. And they're seeing what they have. And they realize that they have to choose something. And then they have to fix the something because they know that what they get isn't good. They don't want what they see. They know when they get something, they're going to have to fix it. They're going to have to break it down, tear it down. It's like you'll use the old horse terms. Horses, you brought in a stag, you brought in a Mustang. Mustangs were wild horses. In order to get a horse, you had to bring a Mustang in, but in order to bring that horse in, that wild Mustang in, you had to break the horse. You had to domesticate it. It's like taking a wild animal and domesticating it. This is the way many women view guys. Many girls view guys as this wild thing that they have to go in, tame, and domesticate and create. In other words, the man, the husband, at the time of the wedding is the girl's creation. This is what she created. This is the mind. This is what's going on inside the mind of the girl when they initially approach this. What ends up happening during this sort of journey, if they will, is that many girls don't survive it because what they expect to happen is not reality. The guys do not care about the relationship. It is very difficult to get the guys to care about relationship. And when you have an open sexual environment where you have sexuality being taught as normal, you're not going to get a guy who's going to say, oh, yeah, I'm going to settle down, when the option for being completely sexual is open. If that sexual option is always open and it's okay for them, they view this as part of normal society, then they're not going to choose marriage. This is something that a girl wants. And most guys will not choose marriage. It is something that girls primarily want. Marriage and a stable partner, someone that you have a life partnership with. is something that is fundamentally a female ideal. It's a feminine idea at this particular point in time. It doesn't have to be a feminine idea, but it is primarily a feminine idea. This is where it initially emerges from, and unfortunately, guys do not necessarily respond to it. The more sexually open the environment is, the less they actually respond to this call to be domesticated, call to be domiciled, to be a single a husband, if you will. And unfortunately, there are a number of religions out there that allow a husband to have multiple wives. And this sort of, further put the strain on girls and sort of say, women, in terms of they accept marriage, are going to have to accept marriage to men that may not necessarily view them as something worthwhile. In other words, they'll marry the woman, they'll have the children, which are necessary for the man to show his status. But then when he's done with the woman is now raising his children, he'll seek a younger, better version of that woman for his pleasure. In other words, there is the duty and then there's the pleasure. And the duty is the wife. That's the things you have to be dutiful for. And then the pleasure is something else. They're typically young girls. This is we see in a variety of different religions, not simply Islam, but there's a variety of religions that are like that. Socialism takes off of this and says, well, if this is the case here, let's just simply have an open sexual society and everyone can do what they want. That's not necessarily, again, this is not necessarily what girls want. If you look at what girls want in terms of when they grow up, they're always talking about finding that wife, they're talking about finding that husband, having a marriage, having children. And they understand that if they don't have that, because if this has actually happened in history, liberalism has been around enough in history that you have older women who have not married, and they wind up back at home. They wind up that old cat lady. They see the cat lady, the crazy old cat lady, living with her mother. Well, that's the liberal. That's the liberal woman. The world is not necessarily there for you if you were going to have a good life. And so they see this and they go, no, I do not want to die alone. I do not want to die in a state old age home. I don't want to die the way I see on TV in terms of socialism. I want to die with my family. I want to die with my husband. This is the way I want to die. This is the way I want to go out. No matter what you believe in afterwards. And because this is what they want, based on what they see, when they look at the options that they have today and they see how slim the options are, there's a lot of depression and there's a lot of, this is where the problem of cutting comes in. You see them slitting their wrists and see them, the cut marks on their hands. You see all this, this whole thing about cutting that's often in the media, and you see the suicides. This is all about sex abuse. This is why women view sex in terms of what's happening to them. The sex, you gotta understand, sex is done to women. Women do not do sex to men. Sex is done to a woman. It's the action that is performed on the woman. The woman has to submit to sex. Because it's not the woman who's penetrating the man. It's the man who's penetrating the woman. So sex is something, it's an action against the woman, not the woman against the man. So in other words, the woman has to submit to the sexual act in order for the sexual act to be consentive. So in other words, have consent, the woman has to consent to being objectified, to being placed as an object, and to being violated. This is what she has to consent to. And she has to define it in such a way in terms of consent that this is something that she considers desirable, that she considers to be pleasurable, and something that she wants. Unfortunately, in the sexual world, particularly in the world of sexual pleasure, it's always been about the pleasure of man. Because men are typically the clients. And if you want to make money, you need to make sure that the man is having a good time, and he needs to see that you're having a good time. Oh yes, I'm enjoying this, please more. Oh yes, I do very much enjoy this. This is what the man has to hear in order to pay the money. You want to feed yourself, you want to feed your family, you got a family you need to feed, right? That's how you do it. You have someone who owns you, right? You're in a club, you're in a place to have a place to stay. The man owns you. There's a person who owns you. In order to make that money that the person wants, who owns you, to be that product has to perform well. And there's always this education now coming in. Education is psychology, psychological conditioning. Is teaching people how to behave in order to please others. This is sexual behavior. This is sexual conditioning. Sexual conditioning is of teaching the person the sexual condition of making sure that the person who's being acted upon, in other words, who's receiving the sex, who's being the object, that they have to behave in such a way that they find that they're presenting a product of pleasure, not a product of pain. And so what happens when you talk to girls who talk about, this whole thing about friends with benefits, sex without consequences. That, you can have sex and it doesn't mean anything. In these chat groups, I have to say, this is something you like, this is something you enjoy. It asked the question, was it always this way? When you first started, is this how you felt? And the answer was no. This was a feeling that they developed. The first initial feeling when they first had sex was they cried. They were horrified by it. But as they learned to repress their feelings, their emotions on what was happening to them, they began to enjoy it. In other words, in order for a person to become sexual, particularly girls, they have to repress their natural emotions, their first instinct, and train themselves to say, this is fun, this is pleasurable. In other words, the first instinct is not pleasurable, it is not fun, it is not enjoyment, it is horror. And it's only when you repress these emotions and suppress these emotions, that's when it becomes fun, that's when it becomes pleasurable, and this is not anything more than abuse. Even if the person seems like they're having fun. When you're doing something, when you're attacking another person, when you're having sex with another, you're doing sex to another person. In other words, you're fucking another person. Their first instinct is not enjoyment. Their first instinct is abuse. It is only after being conditioned psychologically that they view this as enjoyment. So in other words, you're seeing the enjoyment as a result of psychological conditioning. It is not a conscious, immediate choice, not a conscious, immediate consent. When we come back on the other side, the education is now being brought down to elementary school.
iNN, uncut, unedited, and real. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Hi, my name is Dr. Danny Karras. I'm your host for Headlines and Beyond on iNN. If you like the show we're seeing, I do not monetize my channel because there's a lot of copyright issues with this. It creates a lot of problems. So how do I make my money? Well, if you like this show, it's very simple. We do it the PBS format. I ask you for a donation, but I'm not going to ask you for a lot. Or, well, all you have to do is, if you have $1 or $2 in your pocket, take it out, put it in an envelope. I'll give you the address. It will be in the description of my channel. Go to the channel description, go to About, and you'll see the address to send the $1 or $2 that you send. All I'm asking for $1 or $2. If you got $1 or $2 in your pocket, stick it in an envelope. Send it to iNN. That's iNN. The address is 87 Telson Road. It's 87 Telson, Telson Road. That's in Markham, Ontario. Postal code is L3R184. And I thank you for your support. Alrighty.
iNN, provoke, inform, and change. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
In Ontario and around the United States, the attempt to become more socially current has taken on a new pace with the Liberal Premier, Kathleen Wynne. And people have assumed that Liberal is, it doesn't matter if I vote Liberal, as long as they tell me what I want to hear. In other words, they're going to talk about poverty, they're going to fix poverty, they're going to bring back all these different social programs. Social programs are going to help people, they're going to be very philanthropic. And they assume that all you have to do is unelect one liberal because they're doing something I don't like, and put in another liberal, and everything would be hunky dory. Well, unfortunately, that's not the reality. Liberalism is a philosophy, and it covers a variety of different groups. Green Party is one of them. These environmental parties are liberals. They're socialists on the left. Your NDP, New Democrat Party, liberals, Democrats. These parties, in many cases, if you look at them carefully, they're all socialist. They believe in the social structure, and unfortunately, they also have this social view of people as being sexual beings. In other words, they're going to educate children, and this is their goal, because they are education oriented, in order to teach people to be a proper human being within their proper socialist utopia. In order to achieve this utopia, this new world order, they're going to use education. Because that's what they believe in. They believe in education. As long as you educate a person, then it's okay. Education is the way. And this includes sexual education. Sexual education is not teaching about health. It's about how to have healthy sexual relationships. And because they view children as sexual beings, because all people are sexual beings, they need to teach children how to be proper sexual beings, how to properly approach and accept sex. And as I said before, these people are liberals. They are ignorant. They are intolerant. As I demonstrated before, we saw this with how they sort of ignored what happened with the atomic bomb. We saw how they ignored this whole thing about genetics and what's really going on in genetics. We see that they are indeed intolerant, and they are ignorant of things. They don't want to see reality. And so even when you talk to the girls online, you go hang out with people online, and talk to the girls who are sexually active, who have this view that there's no problem with having sex, being sexually open. You ask them if this was their first reaction, they say no. The original reaction was not, oh, this was something, because there was something that horrified them. It was something they viewed as abusive. They had to sort of repress their emotions afterwards. Then you begin to understand that when they come up with articles and research from these different professors who say that there's nothing wrong with sexualizing children, and that children can indeed have proper sexual relationships, even with adults, they can have open relationships. So in other words, we're going back into the concept here again. There's no reality, and that's why you have the LGBT community, the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender community. That community by itself exists solely on concept that we are in an anarchist, a postmodernist, nihilist society. This is that liberal view of openness, open sexuality that's being brought into the school, and of course, the LGBT orientation is about sex. It's about the sexual being, and of course, as they bring the education in to teach people about be tolerant, be accepting of the LGBT understanding of things, the concept of open sexuality, they're going to include the open sexuality of adult-child relationships. In other words, you're going to have, because children are sexual beings, this is what they talk about. They say, oh yes, children are sexual beings. That it doesn't do them any harm for children to have sex. So if you have a man, and there is a video that I'll be posting and talking about, this is in France, a man talking about having sex with on TV, openly talking about having sex with a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, and how wonderful it was. There are many people out there who believe in the sexuality of children. It's not just, and it's women too. There are women out there who believe in the sexuality of children. They believe, and you'll find as you go into these more artistic, liberal environments, and into these so-called intellectual environment, that when you get into the concept of open sexuality is really there, and that they really don't see anything wrong with sexual relationships with children. Now they'll often say, "Oh, we don't believe in abusing children," but they'll teach the child properly how to be properly sexual. And ironically enough, this is actually what you see coming into the sex education program. You're seeing teachers now, the education system, teaching children how to be sexual. And people say, well, as long as this is a view of a few liberals. It's not a view of a few liberals. This is the liberal philosophy. This is their base understanding. So it doesn't matter what liberal, whether they're NDP, Democrat, Liberal, Green Party, it doesn't matter what brand they are of liberal, is the fact that they believe in the liberal ideology, the liberalism, which is basically postmodernism. It is that view that is dominant, that is predominant, and allows them to say anything they want to say. Because everything is true. If there is no truth, everything is concept, then you can say as a politician, you can say anything you want to say, and it doesn't matter because everything is true. Everything's just really concept. It is the politician on the right, the so-called right, the Republican, the conservative, who still, even though they violate a lot of the morality, there is a lot of violation of morality on the right, they still believe in the morality. They still try to hold up this morality. And as a result, they become more vulnerable to shifts in moods in society. And I'll give an example here. Senator Ted Stevens in Alaska, he was put in jail for tax fraud. His tax fraud really wasn't much in consideration to what the Democrat Charlie Rangel has done. You look at Charles Rangel, you look at he's a Democrat, and you look at the amount of tax fraud he's done. Nothing can compare. It's significantly more than what Ted Stevens has done. Stevens was put in jail for I don't know for how many years. He actually died in jail because he was an old person. Rangel was it was just simply a mistake, and they just let the guy go. There wasn't an investigation. This is the difference between a liberal politician and a conservative politician. Conservative respect the law. They are more vulnerable to public pressure, to listening to public pressure in terms of resigning and doing what the public wants, but doing what the constituent wants. The liberals don't care. They'll say anything in order to get elected and stay elected. Say, well, that's just the United States. Well, let's go to Canada here. In Ontario, you've had two successive Liberal governments. First, Premier Dalton McGuinty, and then now Kathleen Wynne. Kathleen Wynne was part of the Dalton McGuinty government. Matter of fact, he was her choice to become Premier of Ontario. In other words, Ontario did not get Kathleen Wynne by election. She was appointed. She was appointed Premier. And because Canadians are basically in a stupor, they are fundamentally apathetic about voting and going out to the polls. Mostly Liberals went out to the polls and voted for Kathleen Wynne, and so the result is that she was elected as Premier for the next 5 years. She has now popped up and saying she's going to bring in a sex education program that reflects what's going on in Europe. It's modernizing the sex education program in Europe, in Ontario, just the way they've done in Europe. Europe has had this sort of open sex education program since the 1970s, where they say we're going to openly sexualize our children. They view this as normal. They actually, in many cases, in order to teach kindergartens, you'll go into a kindergarten playground in Europe, and you will find a penis slide. Yeah, that's right. They'll have a slide in the shape of a penis, and you'll see children sliding down this penis slide. This is liberal education. They're being educated. Don't worry about it. They're being educated. You know, that's the main important thing. They're being educated. Ironically enough, Interpol and a number of the human rights agencies in Europe has stated that there is an epidemic of child abuse, that there's an epidemic of child prostitution in Germany, in France, in Netherlands, and around the EU. There's a huge epidemic of child prostitution. There's an epidemic of sex slavery. They talk about human trafficking. There's a major problem inside of Europe. And wait a minute here. Aren't they supposed to be sexually open? Isn't a sexually open society supposed to resolve all of this? And yet what we see, what we observe is the sexual degradation getting worse. We see rapes no longer being reported because women cannot be trusted. It cannot be held. Cannot stay a victim long enough so that you can convict the rapist. Rapist, well, that's not really rape. And then these are the arguments. These are the arguments within the legal system. Rape isn't rape. Rape is simply a state of mind. Rape is caused. The state of mind of rape is caused by a woman who is sexually repressed. She's not sexually free. Created by a repressive Christian regime. It's because she's Christian. She has these Christian morals. That's why she views rape as rape. Rape is really sex, and if she were a properly sexualized person, she would not object to that rape. She would understand it as sex and not be bothered by it. This is the legal view of rape. So when you have people who are trafficking women, you have these things going on. The end result in the courts, even though you have police arresting these people, the end result in the courts are very small, slap on the wrist sentences. So these people, they go out and they do it again because there's no actual consequence to the act of raping a woman. And so women understand this. They're seeing what's going on. They see what's happening in the modern world, and this happens in India. And what ends up happening? Well, if they're not going to charge the rapist, and they're not going to, and the woman themselves are going to be raped again by the system. They're going to be put on trial and made sure, grilled the way they are. Then there's no point in reporting rape. You just simply, get over it. And this is what most of society expects from them. And I think, ironically enough, you see this even with the feminists. That when you had Monica Lewinsky being sexually abused by Bill Clinton, they were nowhere around. There was no protests. I mean, they protested when you had a Republican judge who was being nominated for the Supreme Court. He sexually harassed. He said some bad words to a woman, and you had thousands of women in front of the White House protesting on a daily basis for the entire nomination process. But for the entire time that Monica Lewinsky was in the news about this whole issue about whether or not Bill Clinton sexually molested her or not, no protest. And even when they found out that Bill Clinton did indeed sexually molest this girl, no protests. Nothing from the feminist community. We see no protests in front of the Playboy Mansion. We see no protests from the feminists in front of porn shops. We see no protests in front of the porn industry and wherever their offices are located. In other words, we see no protests of the sexual objectification of women at all from the feminists. And then we know these videos are abusive, and yet there's no opposition to it from the feminists. They don't say anything unless there's a political gain to, unless it's a Republican, unless it's a conservative. If it's a liberal, if it's a person who believes in open sexuality, there are no protests. So the only what's your option? How do I deal with all this stuff? Well, the only option is because individually there are people who don't believe all this stuff. This is a group thing. This is something that you get inside of a group. And if you can't change the group's mind, like you can't change the liberals' mind, and you can't change the mind within the school, that's the end. There's no discussion after this. The only option left is to get up and walk out, to leave. And this is what a lot of people don't understand, is that you have options to get away from TV. You can turn off your cable and have your own cable. So I have an Android box on my TV. I don't have regular cable anymore. And I have more content now on my Android box than I had on my cable TV. Next week, and not really next week, next edition, I'm going to be bringing out an education option. A way for you to walk away from the standard education system, which is all opinion now. It's all concept. There's no reality to it anymore. And I'll bring you into a scientific system, a system that actually has real science behind it, because I'm a scientist. I'm a physicist. And it's an open education system. It's not restricted at all. It doesn't teach intolerance. I don't teach you what to think. I show you how to think. How to understand things, how to do research. And this is why this is actually part of the education system. What you've been watching now is part of the education system. If you like this is the education system that I'll be offering. In the next edition of Headlines and Beyond, my name is Dr. Dan Karras, and I will see you then. Have a good day.
Welcome to the library, and I am the librarian. I am the professor. And professor of what? Professor of physics.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light?
Free speech rules here at Democratic Earth.